Hey everyone. I'm posting this here because I honestly don't know what to do with myself right now. I guess I'm just looking for advice, or maybe I just need a vent. My name's David, and until recently, I thought my wife, Rachel, and I were living the kind of life most people dream of. We've been married for 9 years. 9 years of building a life together, sharing dreams, and raising our little boy, Ethan. Rachel is, or was, the type of person who could light up a room. Everyone who met her thought she was kind, charismatic, and driven. And honestly, for a long time, I thought so too. But lately, things haven't been the same. It started a few months ago. Rachel became distant. At first, I thought it was just work stress. She's a real estate agent, and her schedule can get crazy. She started working late, going on client meetings that would last for hours, and answering her phone with this strange guardedness whenever I was in the room. I tried to be understanding. We've always trusted each other, and I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But there were little things that didn't sit right, like how she started wearing her nicest dresses to these client meetings, or how she suddenly needed a new perfume, a scent I'd never smelled on her before. There was one night in particular that stood out. Rachel came home late, around midnight, and I remember catching a whiff of something as she brushed past me. It wasn't her usual perfume. It was muskier, almost masculine. I asked her about it, jokingly, and she just laughed it off. "Oh, that's just from a client's car," she said, a little too quickly. He was giving me tips on staging properties. Nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe her, but something didn't feel right. The turning point came 2 weeks ago. Rachel had been glued to her phone more than usual, giggling at messages and smiling at the screen like a teenager. I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach every time I saw it. One evening, I decided to check our shared phone plan. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. I've never been the snooping type, but curiosity got the better of me. What I found made my blood run cold. There was one number she'd been calling and texting constantly. The timestamps showed long, late-night conversations, often while I was asleep. And they weren't just quick exchanges. These were hours-long calls that started right after her client meetings ended. That night, as Rachel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Who was this person? What were they talking about? Was it innocent? Or was it exactly what I feared? I didn't have answers yet, but I was about to find out. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel's face lit by her phone screen, smiling at messages that weren't from me. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just sit in the dark anymore. If there was nothing to worry about, fine. But if there was, I needed to know. Rachel left the house around 9 a.m., saying she had a showing on the other side of town. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed her laptop. Rachel wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and I knew she used the same password for everything. It took less than 5 minutes to get in. Her inbox was mostly work emails, but then I found a folder labeled Personal. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. At first, there were just receipts, dinner reservations, hotel bookings, but the names on them weren't familiar. And then I found the emails. They were between Rachel and someone named Derek. The messages were flirty at first, filled with little jokes and compliments. But as I scrolled further, they got explicit. "Last night was amazing. I can still feel your nails on my back. I wish I didn't have to leave your bed this morning. Let's plan another meeting soon." The dates lined up perfectly with the nights she'd been working late. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to throw it across the room, but I forced myself to keep reading. I needed to know the full extent of what I was dealing with. One email stood out. It was from 2 days ago. "Can't wait for our next session. Bring that little surprise you mentioned. I'm curious to see if I can handle it." My chest tightened. Session? Surprise? What the hell was going on? I knew I couldn't confront Rachel without more proof. She'd always been good at talking her way out of things, and if I came at her with just emails, she'd find a way to spin it. I needed something undeniable. That's when I remembered the number from our phone records. I used a reverse phone lookup service and found out it was registered to someone named Derek Wilson. A quick Google search told me he was a fitness trainer who worked at a gym Rachel had mentioned before. The pieces were falling into place. Later that afternoon, I called Rachel. "Hey, babe," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "How's the showing going?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Oh, it's great. The couple seems really interested. I might be home late, though. They want to discuss financing options after." It was such an obvious lie, but I played along. "That's awesome. Take your time." As soon as we hung up, I got in my car and drove straight to the gym. The place was crowded, filled with people lifting weights and running on treadmills. I asked the receptionist if Derek was available. "Oh, he's not here right now," she said. "He's probably at his apartment. He works odd hours." "Do you know where that is?" I asked, pretending to be an old friend. The receptionist hesitated, but eventually gave me the address. "Just don't tell him I told you, okay?" "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. When I pulled up to Derek's apartment building, I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find. Maybe Rachel's car parked out front, or some clue that would confirm everything. But the lot was empty, and the blinds on his windows were closed. I sat there for a while, debating what to do. Should I knock on his door? Should I wait to see if Rachel showed up? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this David Johnson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Nurse Carter from St. John's Hospital. Your wife, Rachel, was admitted earlier today. There's been an incident." My blood ran cold. What kind of incident? "She was brought in from another location. I think it's best if you come down here." When the nurse told me Rachel had been admitted to the hospital, my mind went blank. 1,000 scenarios raced through my head, none of them good. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my heart pounding like a war drum. The drive to St. John's felt like it took an eternity. I kept imagining Rachel hurt, maybe in a car accident, or worse. Despite everything I'd discovered, part of me still cared. When I got to the hospital, I went straight to the reception desk. "I'm here for Rachel Johnson," I said, breathless. The receptionist checked her computer, her face tense. "She's in room 316. Take the elevators to the 3rd floor." As I stepped into the elevator, my stomach twisted. The nurse hadn't given me any details, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. When I finally reached Rachel's room, a nurse was standing outside, holding a clipboard. "Are you her husband?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "What happened?" She glanced at her notes, then hesitated. "It's complicated. Your wife was brought here from another residence. She had an accident." "An accident?" I repeated. "What kind of accident?" The nurse lowered her voice. "She was found unconscious at someone else's home, a man named Derek Wilson. When the paramedics arrived, they discovered some items inserted into her that caused internal injuries. She's stable now, but still unconscious." I stared at her, the words hitting me like a freight train. My mind reeled as I tried to process what she just said. Items? Internal injuries? At Derek's house? What exactly was inserted? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The nurse grimaced. "A dumbbell handle." I felt my knees buckle, and I grabbed the wall for support. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of twisted nightmare. When I finally stepped into Rachel's room, my emotions were a tangled mess of rage, humiliation, and disbelief. She was lying there, hooked up to monitors, her face pale and lifeless. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. This was the woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, the mother of my child, and she'd thrown it all away for this. As I sat down in the chair beside her bed, I felt the anger bubbling up again. My hands clenched into fists as I thought about Derek, about their sessions, about how she'd lied to my face over and over again. I could still hear the nurse's voice in my head. A dumbbell handle? What kind of person does this? What kind of person risks everything? Their marriage, their family, their dignity, for something so reckless and degrading. I stayed in that chair for what felt like hours, watching the rise and fall of Rachel's chest as she slept. At one point, the doctor came in to check her vitals, but I barely registered his presence. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Lauren, Rachel's best friend. Lauren, David, are you okay? I heard Rachel's in the hospital. What happened? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. She was at Derek's house. You can guess the rest? Lauren didn't respond right away, but when she did, her message was short and sharp. Lauren, wow. She really outdid herself this time. By the time Rachel woke up, I'd made a decision. Her eyes fluttered open, and she blinked a few times before focusing on me. David, she croaked, her voice hoarse. Yeah, I said, my tone flat. What happened? She asked, trying to sit up. You don't remember? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She frowned, her face scrunching up in confusion. No, I was at Derek's and then, I don't know. Everything's blurry. I leaned forward, my jaw tightening. You passed out during one of your little sessions. Paramedics found you with a dumbbell handle inside you. Rachel's eyes widened, and her face turned a deep shade of red. David, Save it, I snapped, cutting her off. I'm done listening to your excuses. You've humiliated me enough. As Rachel tried to stammer out some kind of explanation, I stood up and grabbed my coat. I'm cutting you off, Rachel, I said, my voice cold. No more money. No more support. You're on your own. David, wait, she cried, reaching out weakly. Please, let me explain. But I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. As I walked out of that hospital room, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Rachel had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. Walking out of that hospital room felt like closing the door on a part of my life I never wanted to revisit. But as the elevator doors closed behind me, my anger bubbled to the surface again. Rachel wasn't just reckless. She was shameless. She hadn't just betrayed me. She humiliated me, dragged our family name through the mud, and put everything we built on the line for her selfish desires. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. The next day, I started the process of cutting her off financially. Rachel and I had a joint bank account, but I'd always been the primary earner. I went to the bank and had my paychecks rerouted to a private account, leaving just enough in the joint account to cover Ethan's needs. Then I called our financial advisor. I want to remove Rachel's access to our credit cards, I said. The advisor hesitated. Are you sure, David? That's a significant step. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied. By the end of the day, Rachel's cards were frozen, and the account balance was locked tight. Meanwhile, I started gathering evidence for the inevitable divorce. I printed out copies of the emails I'd found, screenshots of her text logs, and even the hospital report confirming where she'd been and what had happened. I wanted everything ready so there'd be no room for Rachel to twist the story in her favor. When Rachel was discharged from the hospital, I didn't pick her up. Instead, she had to call a cab, and when she arrived home, I was waiting in the living room. She walked in slowly, her face pale and her eyes puffy from crying. David, Sit down, I said sharply, cutting her off. She hesitated, then sank into the armchair across from me. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. And this time, you're not going to lie to me. Rachel swallowed hard. David, I know I've made mistakes, but… Mistakes? I interrupted, leaning forward. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or leaving the stove on. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious choice to destroy everything we built together. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then she did what she always did. She went on the attack. You were never there for me, David, she snapped, her voice rising. You were so busy with work and providing for Ethan that you forgot about me. I was lonely. Don't you dare try to put this on me. I shot back, my anger boiling over. I was working my ass off to give us a good life. And while I was doing that, you were screwing around with a personal trainer and ending up in the hospital with a dumbbell inside you. Her face flushed red, and she looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen, she muttered weakly. I laughed bitterly. You didn't mean for it to happen? Rachel, you planned trips, booked hotels, and sent explicit messages. This wasn't some accident. It was a full-blown affair. By the time our conversation ended, Rachel was in tears. I told her I was filing for divorce and that she would no longer have access to our finances. "You can't do this to me," she cried, her voice shaking. "I can and I will," I replied coldly. "You made your choices, Rachel. Now you can deal with the consequences." Over the next few days, Rachel tried everything to get back in my good graces. She apologized repeatedly, begged me to reconsider, and even tried to seduce me. But I wasn't falling for it. I could see through her manipulative tactics now. Every apology felt rehearsed. Every plea for forgiveness was laced with self-pity rather than genuine remorse. Then, she got desperate. One evening, as I was putting Ethan to bed, Rachel cornered me in the hallway. "I'll tell everyone you were abusive," she hissed, her eyes wild. "I'll ruin your reputation, David. You think you can just leave me? I'll make sure you regret it." Her threat didn't scare me. It only solidified my resolve. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "But just remember, I have proof of everything. Emails, texts, hospital records. You want to play dirty? You'll lose." Rachel stared at me, stunned. She wasn't used to me standing up to her, and for once, she had no response. That night, I started planning the next phase of my revenge. If Rachel thought she could manipulate me or smear my name, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just going to divorce her. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Rachel's threat to ruin my reputation didn't shake me. It only lit a fire under me. She thought she could manipulate the narrative, twist the truth, and come out on top. But this time, she underestimated me. I spent the next few days compiling everything I had on her. Emails, texts, bank statements showing suspicious transactions, and the damning hospital report. I even downloaded copies of her social media posts that hinted at her late-night work meetings and business trips. I wanted a rock-solid case, something that would leave her no room to wriggle out. Rachel wasn't idle either. She started texting me constantly, alternating between begging for forgiveness and making veiled threats. One message stood out. "Rachel, if you divorce me, I'll make sure Ethan knows you're a monster." That one hurt. Using our son as leverage was a low blow, even for Rachel. But I didn't respond. I wasn't going to stoop to her level. Instead, I decided to get ahead of her games. I reached out to Lauren, her best friend. Lauren and I had always been cordial, but I knew she was fiercely loyal to Rachel. Still, I figured it was worth a shot. "Lauren, I need to talk to you," I said when she picked up the phone. "David, I'm not taking sides in this," she said immediately. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "But you need to know the truth about what Rachel's been doing." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" I sent her a few of the screenshots, just enough to get the point across. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a response. "Lauren, oh my God, is this real?" "Me, every word." Lauren called me back almost immediately. "I had no idea," she said, her voice shaking. "I knew she was acting strange, but I didn't think she'd. God, David, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said, "but I need your help. Rachel's going to try to spin this, and I need someone to back me up." Lauren hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm with you. She needs to be held accountable for this." With Lauren on my side, I moved to the next phase of my plan, exposing Rachel's lies. I sent an email to her parents, Margaret and Richard, attaching the same evidence I'd shared with Lauren. I kept the message brief. "I thought you deserved to know the truth about why Rachel and I are divorcing. I'm doing this for my own peace of mind and to protect Ethan." The response came quickly. Margaret called me. Her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "David, we had no idea," she said. "Rachel told us you were neglecting her, that she felt abandoned. We believed her." "Well, now you know the truth," I said bluntly. "Thank you for telling us," Margaret said. "We'll be having a serious conversation with her." The fallout was immediate. Rachel's parents confronted her, demanding an explanation. She called me that night, screaming into the phone. "How dare you drag my parents into this?" she yelled. "They deserve to know the truth," I said calmly. "You're a vindictive bastard," she spat. "Maybe," I replied. but at least I'm not a liar. But the real blow came when I decided to hit her where it hurt most. Her carefully curated social image. Rachel had always loved portraying herself as the perfect wife and mother on social media. Her Instagram was filled with pictures of us smiling at barbecues, Ethan's school events, and staged family outings. But now, I was about to rip that facade apart. I uploaded a single post to my account. To everyone who's been asking why Rachel and I are separating, here's the truth. She had an affair, lied about it, and humiliated me. I won't be answering any more questions, but I needed to set the record straight. I included screenshots of her texts with Derek, just enough to be irrefutable. The reaction was explosive. People flooded the comments section, some expressing shock, others siding with me. Rachel's friends started texting her, demanding answers. Her phone was likely blowing up as word spread. Later that night, Lauren texted me. "Lauren, she's losing it. She just called me crying, saying you're trying to destroy her life." Me, I'm not trying. I'm succeeding. The next day, Rachel tried to fight back. She posted a long, dramatic message on her Instagram, painting herself as a victim of emotional neglect and claiming I was airing our dirty laundry out of spite. But it didn't take long for people to start calling her out in the comments. "Didn't you cheat on him, though? Neglect doesn't justify what you did." David posted receipts. "Maybe you should just own up to it." Her post was deleted within hours. Over the next few weeks, Rachel's world began to collapse. Her friends distanced themselves, her parents stopped taking her side, and Derek, her oh-so-loyal lover, ghosted her completely. As for me, I finally felt like I was regaining control. I wasn't just some clueless husband anymore. I was someone who stood up for himself, who refused to let a cheater walk away unscathed. The weeks after my social media post felt like a strange mix of relief and chaos. I had exposed Rachel for who she truly was, and the fallout was both swift and satisfying. But as her world crumbled, she became increasingly erratic, lashing out in ways I didn't expect. Rachel tried to salvage her reputation by reaching out to her friends individually. She painted herself as the victim, telling them I was controlling and emotionally distant. But most of them weren't buying it. The screenshots I'd shared were hard to argue with, and Lauren had already filled in a few of the gaps for anyone on the fence. Even her closest friend, Megan, messaged me directly. "Megan, I can't believe Rachel would do this to you. She always made you seem like the problem, but now it all makes sense." Me, "Thanks, Megan. I just wanted the truth out there." Megan, "Well, she's in denial. She keeps saying Derek meant nothing. Like that makes it better?" The phrase, "meant nothing," kept bouncing around in my head. If Derek meant nothing, why risk everything for him? Why blow up our family? Speaking of Derek, I learned through the grapevine that he wasn't exactly loyal to Rachel either. Lauren texted me one evening with some juicy details. "Lauren, guess what I heard? Derek has a girlfriend." Me, "You're kidding." Lauren, "Nope. She found out about Rachel and dumped him. Apparently, he's telling everyone he regrets getting involved with her." I laughed when I read that. Rachel's golden boy had bailed at the first sign of trouble, leaving her to deal with the mess alone. At home, Rachel's behavior became more desperate. She knew she was losing control, and it made her volatile. One evening, she stormed into the living room while I was watching TV. "You've ruined my life, David," she screamed, her face red with anger. I barely looked up. "You ruined your own life, Rachel. Don't blame me for your choices." "I made a mistake," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Does that mean I deserve to be destroyed?" "A mistake?" I repeated, finally standing up. "Rachel, a mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate, selfish choices. And now you're dealing with the consequences." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she'd been caught. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly. Karen, my lawyer, had been a godsend, handling everything with brutal efficiency. Rachel tried to fight for a share of the house, claiming she had contributed financially. But Karen shut her down with detailed records showing I had been the sole payer for the mortgage for years. She also tried to argue for spousal support, but the evidence of her affair and the public humiliation she caused made her case laughable. In the end, the judge sided with me. I kept the house, full custody of Ethan, and my financial stability intact. Rachel walked away with nothing but her clothes and her pride, what little she had left of it. After the ruling, Rachel called me, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Congratulations, David," she said sarcastically. "You've taken everything from me. Are you happy now?" I didn't rise to her bait. "I didn't take anything, Rachel. You threw it all away. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before lying and cheating your way through life." She hung up on me, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt free. Over the next few weeks, Rachel's desperation only grew. She moved into a dingy apartment on the other side of town and started working odd jobs to make ends meet. Lauren kept me updated on the gossip. "Lauren, she's barely scraping by, David. She told Megan she's thinking about moving out of state." Me, good. The farther, the better. Lauren, honestly, I feel bad for her. But she did this to herself. Me, exactly. One evening, Rachel showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking disheveled and defeated. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I need money," she said bluntly, "just enough to get back on my feet." I stared at her, incredulous. "You're joking, right? After everything you've done, you think I'm going to bail you out?" "David, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I screwed up, but I'm still Ethan's mother. Don't you want me to be stable for his sake?" "That's rich coming from you," I said, crossing my arms. "You weren't thinking about Ethan when you were at Derek's house. You've done nothing but prove you can't be trusted." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "This conversation is over. You're not getting another dime from me, Rachel. You made your bed. Now lie in it." I closed the door in her face and locked it, ignoring her muffled sobs on the other side. Rachel eventually moved out of town, just as Lauren had predicted. She sent me a half-hearted email a few weeks later, apologizing for everything and asking for updates on Ethan. I didn't respond. For the first time in a long time, my life felt calm. The storm Rachel had created was finally over, and I was ready to rebuild. After Rachel left town, it felt like a giant weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, maybe years, my life wasn't consumed by her lies, manipulations, or drama. The house was quiet, peaceful, and for once, I could focus on myself and Ethan. But as much as I tried to move forward, there were moments where the past still lingered. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of a photo we hadn't packed away yet. One of those cheesy family portraits we'd taken a few years back. Rachel was smiling, her arms wrapped around Ethan and me, as if everything was perfect. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly whenever I saw it. That photo was a lie, just like the life we'd been living. Ethan was my biggest motivation to keep going. He was only 7, too young to fully understand what had happened, but old enough to sense that something was different. One night, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Dad, why doesn't Mom live here anymore?" My throat tightened. "Your mom had to move somewhere else," I said carefully. "But it's not your fault, okay? She loves you very much." "Do you still love her?" he asked, his voice small. The question hit me harder than I expected. "No, buddy," I said after a long pause. "I don't. But that doesn't mean I don't want her to be okay." Ethan nodded, seeming to accept my answer. "I'm glad you stayed," he said quietly, and then he rolled over and went asleep. His words stuck with me. I had stayed. Through the lies, the betrayal, the chaos, I had stayed. And now, I was determined to make sure Ethan had the stability he deserved. A few weeks later, I decided to do something symbolic. Rachel had left behind a lot of things. Clothes, trinkets, old photos, and I'd been avoiding dealing with them. But one Saturday afternoon, while Ethan was at a friend's house, I grabbed a few boxes and started packing. I tossed her forgotten shoes, The dresses she'd worn to her work meetings, and even the perfume she'd bought for Derek into a box. Each item felt like a piece of dead weight I was finally letting go of. When I got to the photo albums, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to throw them out, to erase every trace of her from our lives. But another part of me, the part that still valued the memories we'd made with Ethan, decided to keep them. They weren't for me. They were for him. Once the house was cleared of Rachel's things, I felt a new sense of clarity. I started focusing on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I joined a gym, not because I wanted revenge body motivation, but because I wanted to feel good again. I picked up hiking, something I'd always loved but never had time for during our marriage. I even reconnected with old friends, people Rachel had subtly pushed out of my life because she didn't like their energy. One of those friends, Mike, invited me out for a drink one Friday night. "You're looking better," he said, raising his glass. "How's life been?" "Honestly," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Better than it's been in years. It's weird, though. I feel like I'm starting from scratch." "That's not a bad thing," Mike said. "Sometimes a clean slate is exactly what you need." He was right. I even started dipping my toes into the dating world again. At first, it felt strange, sitting across from someone new, talking about my life and listening to theirs. But it also felt freeing. I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't looking for someone to replace Rachel. I was just taking things slow, learning to enjoy the process of getting to know someone without any expectations. One of those dates, Hannah, surprised me with her honesty. "So, what's your story?" she asked over dinner. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to be upfront. "My wife cheated on me," I said. "It was messy, but I'm out of it now." Hannah smiled gently. "Well, you don't seem broken. That's a good sign." I chuckled. I was. But I think I'm finally putting the pieces back together. Every day, I felt stronger, more confident, and more at peace. Rachel had been a storm in my life, but now the skies were clear, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Not just the betrayal, but the way it had reshaped me. For a long time, I had been lost in the whirlwind of my marriage, too focused on keeping things afloat to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But now, with the dust settled, I could see it all clearly. Lesson 1. Trust your instincts. The red flags had been there for a long time. Rachel's sudden late nights, her overly secretive behavior, the way she started treating me like a stranger in my own home. I wanted to believe her lies because the alternative was too painful to face. But ignoring my gut only delayed the inevitable. If I'd listened to myself sooner, maybe I could have saved myself some of the heartbreak. Lesson 2. Respect is non-negotiable. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's disrespect had started long before the affair. She would talk down to me in front of our friends, dismiss my feelings, and act like her needs were the only ones that mattered. At the time, I chalked it up to stress or a rough patch. But now I know better. A healthy relationship is built on mutual respect, and once that respect is gone, everything else crumbles. Lesson 3. People show you who they are. Rachel's affair wasn't just a betrayal. It was the culmination of who she'd always been. She was selfish, manipulative, and unwilling to take accountability for her actions. For years, I'd ignored the signs, convincing myself she would change. But people don't change unless they want to. And Rachel never wanted to. Lesson 4. You're stronger than you think. When I first found out about Rachel's betrayal, I thought my world was ending. The pain was so overwhelming. I didn't think I'd ever recover. But I did. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt like giving up. But with every step I took, every piece of evidence I gathered, every boundary I set, I proved to myself that I could survive. Lesson 5. Letting go is a superpower. One of the hardest things I've had to learn is how to let go. Not just of Rachel, but of the anger, resentment, and bitterness that came with her. For a while, those emotions drove me. They gave me the strength to fight back and reclaim my life. But holding on to them for too long would have only poisoned me. Letting go didn't mean forgiving Rachel or forgetting what she'd done. It meant freeing myself from the weight of her actions so I could move forward. Rebuilding. I'd like to say that my life is perfect now, but that would be a lie. There are still tough days, moments when I question everything or feel a pang of sadness for the life I thought I'd have. But those moments are fleeting. For the most part, I feel hopeful. I'm building a life for myself and Ethan that's free from lies and manipulation. I'm reconnecting with old passions, exploring new opportunities, and learning to value myself in ways I never did before. Advice for anyone going through this: if you're reading this and find yourself in a similar situation, here's what I want you to know. 1. You're not alone. Betrayal is one of the hardest things to face, but you don't have to do it by yourself. Lean on your friends, your family, or even strangers on the internet. 2. Don't ignore the signs. If something feels off, trust your gut. It's better to face the truth than to live in denial. 3. Protect yourself. Whether it's financially, emotionally, or legally, make sure you're taking steps to safeguard your future. 4. You deserve better. No matter what your partner says to justify their actions, remember that their betrayal is a reflection of them, not you. 5. Keep going. It won't be easy, and there will be days when you feel like giving up, but I promise it gets better. Looking forward. These days, I feel like I'm finally starting to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. I'm more confident, more self-assured, and more focused on the things that truly matter. Rachel was a storm, but I survived it. And now, I'm looking forward to brighter skies ahead. As I moved further away from the chaos Rachel had left in her wake, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. It was subtle at first, just a glimmer of hope here and there. But over time, it grew stronger. For so long, my life had been defined by survival. Surviving the betrayal, the lies, and the emotional fallout. But now, I was finally in a place where I could start thriving. Building a stable home. Ethan was my first priority. After everything he'd been through, I wanted to make sure he had a safe, happy environment where he could thrive. I repainted his bedroom, letting him choose the colors, bright blue and green, because, according to him, those are superhero colors. I started taking him to baseball games, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. One night, as we were watching TV, he leaned against me and said, "I like it when it's just us, Dad." His words hit me right in the chest. It wasn't just about rebuilding for me. It was about creating a life where Ethan could feel secure and loved, without the shadows of Rachel's betrayal hanging over us. Reconnecting with myself. For years, I'd sacrificed so much of myself to make Rachel happy. My hobbies, my friendships, my sense of identity, all of it had taken a back seat to her endless demands. Now, I had the chance to rediscover who I was. I picked up my guitar again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, my fingers stumbled over the strings, but muscle memory kicked in soon enough. Playing music felt like reconnecting with an old friend, one who had been patiently waiting for me to come back. I also started hiking regularly. There was something healing about being in nature, about standing on a mountaintop and feeling the wind on my face. It reminded me that the world was so much bigger than my pain, opening the door to new relationships. Eventually, I decided to give dating another shot. It wasn't about finding someone to replace Rachel. It was about proving to myself that I could open my heart again. I went on a few casual dates, some better than others. There was Melissa, who loved talking about her rescue dogs, and Carla, who had a laugh so infectious it made me forget my nerves. But it was Hannah who really caught my attention. We met through a mutual friend, and from the moment we started talking, it felt easy. On our second date, I decided to be honest about my past. "My wife cheated on me," I said, watching her carefully. "It was messy, and I'm still figuring things out, but I don't want that to define me, or what I'm looking for." Hannah smiled, her eyes warm. "I think it's brave that you're even trying. A lot of people would shut down after something like that." Her words stuck with me. Maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. Rachel tries one last time. Just as things were starting to feel normal again, Rachel made one final attempt to insert herself back into my life. She called me out of the blue one afternoon, her voice trembling. "David, I need to talk to you, she said. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied. Please, she begged. Just hear me out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her new apartment. When I arrived, she looked different, thinner, more tired. Her once polished appearance replaced with something far more fragile. I'm sorry, she said as soon as I sat down. For everything. For lying, for cheating, for all the ways I hurt you. I didn't say anything, letting her words hang in the air. I just wanted you to know that, she continued, her voice cracking. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to be better. For Ethan's sake. Her apology sounded genuine, but it didn't change anything. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully, but that doesn't mean I can forget what happened. We're in a better place now, Rachel, for Ethan, for ourselves, and I want to keep it that way. But that's all it's ever going to be. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I understand, she said quietly, and just like that, we closed the chapter for good. Looking to the future. These days, I find myself thinking less about Rachel and more about what's ahead. I'm not sure where life will take me, but for the first time in years, I feel ready to embrace it. I've learned that heartbreak doesn't define you. What you do with it does. You can let it break you, or you can let it make you stronger. For me, it's been a little of both. But as I look at Ethan, at the life we're building together, I know one thing for sure. The best is yet to come. As I sit here writing this, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed. A year ago, I was drowning in betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. Now, I feel lighter, freer, and more hopeful than I ever thought possible. It hasn't been easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, but I'm proud of how far I've come. Looking back on everything, there are a few things I've learned that I hope might help others going through something similar. 1. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Looking back, there were so many signs that Rachel wasn't being honest. Her late nights, the way she guarded her phone, the subtle changes in her behavior. I wanted to believe her because the truth was too painful to face. But in the end, my gut was right. If your instincts are telling you something is off, pay attention. It doesn't mean you have to jump to conclusions, but don't dismiss your feelings either. 2. Take control of your narrative. When Rachel's lies started to unravel, she tried to rewrite the story, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. At first, I wanted to stay quiet, to avoid the drama, but I realized that staying silent would only let her control the narrative. Sharing the truth, whether with friends, family, or even on social media, was one of the most empowering things I did. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. 3. Protect yourself. One of the first things I did after discovering Rachel's affair was secure my finances and gather evidence. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. If you're in a situation where trust has been broken, don't assume things will resolve amicably. Protect your assets, document everything, and seek legal advice. It's not about being vindictive, it's about being prepared. 4. Let go of the anger. For a long time, anger was the only thing keeping me going. It fueled me through the confrontation, the divorce, and the fallout. But eventually, I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. Letting go doesn't mean forgiving or forgetting. It means choosing not to let the pain define you anymore. It's a process and it takes time, but it's worth it. 5. Focus on what matters. Ethan was my anchor through all of this. Every decision I made was with him in mind, and that gave me the strength to keep going. When your world is falling apart, focus on what truly matters. Your kids, your health, your future. Everything else will fall into place. 6. It gets better. I know it sounds cliché, but it's true. When I first found out about Rachel's betrayal, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine ever feeling normal again, let alone happy. But here I am, stronger and more content than I've been in years. It takes time, patience, and a lot of work, but things do get better. These days, my life feels like a blank slate, a chance to start fresh and build something new. Ethan and I have a routine now, one that's filled with laughter, love, and the occasional mess. I'm learning to trust again, not just in other people, but in myself. Rachel's betrayal was a turning point, but it doesn't define me. What defines me is how I chose to respond. By standing up for myself, protecting my son, and refusing to let her actions destroy me. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, you're stronger than you think. You deserve better than lies and betrayal. And no matter how dark things feel right now, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Keep going. You'll get there. Here's to new beginnings. With Rachel out of the picture and my life finally stabilizing, I started focusing on building a future that was entirely mine. The scars of the past were still there. Some days, I could feel them like an ache in my chest, but they no longer consumed me. They were just reminders of what I'd survived. The house felt different now. The silence that once felt heavy and lonely became a comfort, a space where I could breathe. I turned what used to be Rachel's office into a playroom for Ethan, complete with superhero posters and a tiny basketball hoop. Ethan thrived in the new environment. He was doing better in school, smiling more, and even making friends he'd invite over for sleepovers. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he said, "Dad, our house feels happy now." That simple statement meant more to me than he could ever know. Reconnecting with old friends brought a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. Rachel had isolated me without me even realizing it. She always found subtle ways to undermine my relationships, either by complaining about my friends or making me feel guilty for spending time with them. Now, I had a support system again. Mike, one of my oldest friends, became my go-to for Friday beers and venting sessions. Lauren, surprisingly, became a constant ally. Despite being Rachel's former best friend, she stayed in touch, offering advice, checking in, and even babysitting Ethan when I needed a night off. "You're doing great, David," she said one evening. "Rachel might have tried to break you, but you're stronger than she ever gave you credit for." Hiking became my sanctuary. Every weekend, I'd find a new trail, pack a small lunch, and just lose myself in the woods. There was something about the quiet, the crisp air, and the challenge of climbing to the top of a hill or mountain that cleared my mind. It reminded me of the simple joys I'd neglected for years, joys that weren't tied to anyone else's expectations. I even started journaling. At first, it felt awkward, like I was talking to myself, but over time, it became a way to process my thoughts and reflect on how far I'd come. Hannah and I continued to see each other, and what started as casual dates began to feel like something more. She was kind, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You know, you don't have to be perfect, right?" I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's okay to be a work in progress," she said. "You've been through a lot, and it's okay if you're still figuring things out." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I'd felt like I had to have everything together, like I couldn't afford to stumble. But with Hannah, I felt safe enough to let my guard down. The last I heard about Rachel, she had moved to another state and was working at a retail job to make ends meet. Lauren told me she tried to reach out to some old friends, but most of them had cut ties. "She burned too many bridges," Lauren said. "People got tired of her drama." I didn't feel joy in hearing that. I didn't feel much of anything. Rachel was a chapter of my life that I'd closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. If I could go back and talk to the version of myself who first found out about Rachel's betrayal, this is what I'd say. Asterisk, you're going to feel like your world is ending. You're going to question everything, your marriage, your worth, your ability to move forward. But you will move forward. It won't happen overnight, and there will be days when it feels impossible. But little by little, you'll rebuild. You'll find strength you didn't know you had, and you'll create a life that's more fulfilling than you ever imagined. Keep going. The best is yet to come. Asterisk, the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I realize just how far I've come. What felt like the darkest chapter of my life was really a turning point, one that forced me to confront who I was and what I wanted. Life is quieter now, but it's a good quiet. Ethan and I have found a rhythm, one that's filled with laughter, school projects, and little moments of joy. We've created a home where he feels safe and loved, where he can grow without the shadow of tension and betrayal hanging over him. There are still days when I think about Rachel, not out of anger or longing, but as a reminder of how much I've grown. She's a chapter of my life that taught me hard lessons about trust, respect, and self-worth. Hannah has become an unexpected but welcome part of my journey. We're taking things slow, and I've learned not to rush or force anything. Being with her feels easy, like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating in something toxic. Sometimes, I think about what I'd tell someone going through what I did. The pain, the betrayal, the hopelessness. It can feel all-consuming. But here's what I've learned. You're stronger than you think. The person who hurt you doesn't define your worth. And even when it feels like the world is ending, it's really just giving you a chance to rebuild. Rachel's betrayal broke me, but it also gave me the opportunity to create a life that's truly mine. And for that, I'm grateful. The road ahead is still uncertain, but I'm no longer afraid. For the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to the future, not with dread, but with hope. Here's to new beginnings.